The day a German shepherd saw what no one else did. Sometimes it takes a child's silence to reveal a community's blind spot. Sometimes it takes a dog's bark to shatter it. At Maple Hollow Elementary, 8-year-old Noah Carter was the boy nobody noticed. Quiet, awkward, invisible. Until one Tuesday when his lunch nearly killed him. Shadow, the canine who patrolled the school halls, caught what no one else could. His bark ripped through the cafeteria. His teeth clamped onto a lunchbox that didn't belong. By nightfall, detectives discovered poison inside, lethal enough to end a life. Noah's quiet existence suddenly became the center of chaos. But what followed was more than just an investigation. It was a reckoning, a reminder that behind every lonely child might be a story unseen, and behind every bark could be the difference between life and death. The lunch bell at Maple Hollow Elementary always sounded like freedom to the children, sharp, metallic, and followed by the rush of sneakers slapping linoleum floors. By noon, the cafeteria was already alive with the symphony of childhood, laughter bubbling, trays scraping, juice boxes hissing as straws pierced foil tops. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too sterile, but no one seemed to mind. For the fourth graders, this was the heart of their day. A kingdom of peanut butter sandwiches, pizza squares, and whispered jokes. Officer Daniel Carter sat at a corner table near the exit, as he always did, a steaming cup of black coffee cooling between his calloused hands. He wasn't in uniform, not the kind that bristled with weapons and authority, but the navy jacket with the school district patch still marked him as someone different. A former Marine with 2 tours behind him, he carried himself with that quiet rigidity soldiers never lose, the kind that made children glance at him twice before deciding he was safe. He was. Most days, his job was part security, part counselor, part weary father figure. At his feet lay Shadow. The German shepherd looked less like a pet and more like a sentinel carved from living muscle. His coat shimmered in shades of black and deep brown, his chest broad, his ears always pitched forward as though catching signals others missed. The children adored him, though most kept their distance. A working dog is not to be touched without permission. Still, they waved as they passed, and Shadow would sometimes tilt his head in acknowledgement. Carter sipped, watching the tide of children surge from table to table. He'd grown used to their chaos. The squeak of styrofoam trays, the high-pitched squeals when someone spilled milk, the quiet clusters of loners picking at food while avoiding eye contact. In every school, there were the loud ones, the bold ones, and then there were the kids like Noah Bennett. Carter's eyes found him easily. Noah always sat at the same spot, a corner table, tucked under the humming light near the back. He was 8 years old, small for his grade, his shoulders perpetually hunched as if trying to disappear into the worn gray hoodie he wore day after day. His sneakers were scuffed, laces uneven. He rarely spoke above a murmur, and when other kids laughed, he smiled faintly, as if unsure whether he was allowed to join in. Today, like most days, Noah unwrapped his sandwich slowly, almost reverently, before lining up goldfish crackers in neat rows along the tray. Carter had seen kids like him before. He remembered their names long after they moved on, the quiet ones, the invisible ones. Marines had a saying, the quietest men in the unit were often the ones you wanted most at your back. Maybe that was true of kids, too. Shadow shifted beside him, a soft rustle of claws against the floor. The dog's chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. At a glance, he seemed relaxed, but Carter knew better. Shadow never fully shut down, not even in sleep. He was always processing, always watching. His dark eyes moved from one table to another, following the arc of a lunch lady's cart, the bounce of a basketball someone had smuggled inside, the tremor of a tray carried by a boy too eager to sit. Carter reached down absently, brushing his fingers against the shepherd's ear. "Easy, partner," he murmured. "It's just lunch." Shadow flicked his ear, but didn't lean into the touch. His attention was elsewhere. Trained on the currents of the room, Carter couldn't quite read. The cafeteria noise swelled again. A group of girls burst into laughter, shrill and sudden. Somewhere a carton of milk hit the floor, splattering white across the tiles. A teacher muttered in annoyance, rushing forward with a wad of napkins. Carter's gaze wandered back to Noah. The boy had finished arranging his crackers but wasn't eating. He just stared at them, chin resting on his hand. There was a look there Carter recognized, the look of a kid who wished he were somewhere else, anywhere else, but didn't know how to ask. Carter blew on his coffee, savoring the bitter steam. On days like this, he thought his job was too easy. Quiet school, predictable schedule, predictable kids. He almost felt guilty for it after the life he'd lived before. Danger used to have a scent, sharp as burning oil. Now his days smelled like tater tots and cleaning supplies. Maybe that was the point. Maybe peace was supposed to feel dull. Shadow's tail twitched once, a slow sweep across the floor. His nostrils flared. Carter didn't notice at first. He was watching a group of fifth graders dare each other to mix corn with chocolate pudding. But Shadow noticed everything. The scrape of a chair, the faint metallic tang riding the cafeteria air, something out of place in the blur of sameness. Still, he stayed down, muscles tight but contained. To the casual observer, he was calm. Only Carter, if he'd looked, would have seen the way Shadow's ears angled forward like radar dishes, the way his body aligned toward the back corner where Noah sat. Noah lifted the lid of a Spider-Man lunchbox, red and blue, paint chipped on the edges. It was new to him, new enough that the boy's fingers lingered on the design, as though savoring ownership of something special. He took out the sandwich, set it carefully on the tray. The lunchbox sat open on the table, catching the light. Carter tapped his cup against the table, exhaling slowly. Another minute or two and he'd make his usual lap around the room. That was his routine. Keep moving, keep eyes open, let the kids know someone was watching. He glanced down at Shadow again. The shepherd's breathing had changed, just a fraction faster, like an engine revving low. "Something on your mind, boy?" Carter asked softly. Shadow didn't answer, of course. He didn't have to. His gaze was already locked, unblinking, on that splash of red and blue sitting on Noah's table. The ordinary lunch hour was still humming along, the laughter, the squeals, the clatter of trays. But in the tight coil of Shadow's body, in the sharp stillness of his stare, something else had begun. A thread pulled taut. A moment balanced on the edge of change. Carter didn't know it yet, but the peace he thought was dull, the safety he thought routine, was about to fracture. And it would begin not with a scream, not with a siren, but with a bark. It happened in a heartbeat, though later Carter would remember every second in slow motion. One moment Shadow lay steady at his feet, his chest rising with calm, rhythmic breaths. The next, his body went rigid, muscles coiling beneath his dark coat. His ears snapped forward, hackles bristling along his spine like wire brushes. A low rumble vibrated in his throat, so deep it was felt more than heard. Carter straightened. He had seen Shadow lock onto narcotics buried under floorboards, on chemical traces hidden in trucks. But here, in a school cafeteria, what could possibly trigger him? The answer sat 30 feet away, in the trembling hands of Noah Bennett. The Spider-Man lunchbox glared under the buzzing fluorescent lights, red and blue with paint chipped from the edges. Noah had just set it on the table, a hint of shy pride flickering across his face as though owning something so bright, so normal, made him belong for once. He lifted the lid halfway, hesitating like he didn't want to disturb its perfection. That was when Shadow lunged. The bark tore through the cafeteria like a shotgun blast. It was primal, guttural, the kind of sound that froze bone and cut through chaos. Carter's coffee nearly spilled as Shadow surged forward, the leash biting into his hand. "Shadow!" he barked, bracing his boots against the floor. But the shepherd was relentless, dragging him toward Noah's table with a force that jolted his shoulder. The room shattered into silence. Dozens of children froze mid-bite, crackers halfway to mouths, juice boxes paused in trembling fingers. Then came the screams, high, sharp cries that ricocheted against tiled walls. A teacher dropped her fork, clattering metal echoing through the stillness. Shadow's barking was thunder now, booming, echoing with urgency no one could mistake for play. His teeth bared, but not in attack. This was warning, a sound forged in the marrow of survival. Carter's marine instincts roared to life. He scanned Noah's table, eyes darting. The boy sat rigid, wide-eyed, his sandwich untouched, the lunchbox open beside him like a door left ajar in a storm. "That's mine," Noah stammered, his voice small against the wall of barking. "My mom made it." His cheeks flushed red, his hands trembling as he tried to push the lunchbox closer. Shadow snarled and snapped, clamping his jaws just inches from the metal, pulling the box off the table with a violent jerk. It hit the floor with a metallic thud, sliding across tiles before Shadow pinned it between his front paws, teeth gnashing in fury. Gasps erupted. A girl shrieked. Somewhere near the windows, a tray slipped and crashed, scattering grapes and macaroni in a splash of noise. The cafeteria transformed in seconds from playground to battlefield. Carter yanked hard on the leash, but Shadow would not yield. The shepherd stood over the box, muscles trembling, fur rigid, a growl rolling from his chest like distant thunder. His eyes never left the red and blue paint, his nostrils flaring as if something inside reeked of death. "Everyone back!" Carter roared, his voice cutting through panic. The teachers hesitated, stunned by the ferocity of what they were seeing. "Move them out, now!" The children scrambled, chairs screeching, sneakers squealing against the floor. Tears streaked small faces as they clutched each other, guided by frantic teachers toward the nearest exits. Some cried out for parents, others simply screamed, their voices swallowed by the bark that would not stop. Carter dropped to one knee beside Shadow, his hand pressed firm against the shepherd's collar. "Easy, boy, easy," he whispered, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. His eyes flicked toward Noah, who still hadn't moved, frozen in disbelief. The boy's lips trembled. "Why is he doing that? It's just my lunch. It's just peanut butter." But Carter wasn't listening anymore. His focus shifted to the lunchbox, the way it rattled faintly when Shadow's paw pressed against it, the way condensation misted unnaturally across its surface, even though it had come from Noah's backpack. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Shadow barked again, louder, as if to say what Carter could not yet see. The last of the children poured out through double doors, voices echoing down the hall. The cafeteria stood nearly empty now, save for Carter, Shadow, and a scattering of trembling staff. A fork spun slowly on the floor, where it had been dropped, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. "Get him out," Carter ordered one of the teachers, nodding toward Noah. The boy sat rigid, hands balled into fists, whispering words Carter could barely hear. "It's mine, it's mine." A counselor hurried forward, crouching to guide Noah up. At first the boy resisted, twisting his small shoulders away, but then he allowed himself to be led, his eyes locked on Shadow, as if the shepherd had betrayed him. Carter knelt lower, leaning close to the dog. "What is it, partner?" he murmured. Shadow's growl deepened, reverberating against the tiled floor. The lunchbox lay beneath his paws like a captured enemy, dented but unopened. Carter's stomach tightened. He didn't know what was inside. He only knew Shadow had never sounded like this, not in all their years together. Not when sniffing narcotics, not when detecting chemical traces. This bark was different, desperate, urgent, as if time itself were running out. He pulled his phone from his belt with steady fingers, dialing as he kept his other hand pressed against the dog's collar. His voice when he spoke was calm, almost detached, but his eyes never left the box. "This is Officer Carter, Maple Hollow Elementary. Possible hazardous material. Cafeteria. We need hazmat and backup now." Shadow barked again, the sound vibrating through Carter's bones. The lunchbox gleamed faintly under the lights, ordinary and terrible all at once. A child's possession turned into a question mark no one wanted answered. And in that suspended moment, teachers huddled near the doors, a boy crying in the hallway, a shepherd refusing to move. Carter realized the ordinary day had ended. Something far darker had begun. Carter had been trained to make decisions under fire, but nothing in combat quite resembled the sound of 100 children screaming at once. The cafeteria had become a hive of panic, squealing chairs, frantic footsteps, the sharp wail of frightened voices ricocheting off tiled walls. Teachers. "Get them out! Now!" Carter's voice boomed across the chaos, clipped and firm, the kind of command that cut through noise like a blade. Two teachers froze for a heartbeat, wide-eyed, then scrambled into action. They waved their arms, urging children toward the double doors, corralling the flood of bodies. A fifth-grade girl dropped her tray and bolted, sauce splattering across the floor. A boy near the windows cried so hard his shoulders shook, clutching a carton of milk like a lifeline, until a counselor pried it gently from his hand. Through it all, Shadow didn't budge. The German shepherd's jaws were locked tight on the metal Spider-Man lunchbox, his body pressed low, muscles taut as if holding back something unseen. His eyes, amber, unblinking, burned with an urgency Carter had only seen once before. In the deserts overseas, when a buried IED lay hidden under loose earth. "Shadow." Carter crouched low, the leash straining in his fist. His other hand hovered near the dog's shoulders, steady, firm. The growl vibrating from Shadow's chest was constant, primal, an engine idling on the edge of violence. The lunchbox rattled under the weight of his grip, but he never pierced it. He knew, God help him, he knew, not to break it open. Behind them, the flow of children thinned. The cafeteria's echo shifted from screams to hurried footsteps, fading down the corridor. The teachers moved in practice waves, their voices firm but quivering. "Line up, keep moving, don't look back." One boy, maybe 9, blurted out between sobs, "Are we gonna blow up?" The words cracked the air like glass, and Carter felt his stomach knot. He didn't answer, couldn't. He glanced over his shoulder, half the cafeteria empty now, but still too many left. His pulse drummed at his temples, and then he heard it, a small, trembling voice. "That's my lunch." Noah stood frozen at his table, his skinny arms stiff at his sides, eyes wet but defiant. His voice was barely louder than a whisper, but in the sudden thinning chaos, Carter heard it clear as a bell. "My mom packed it," Noah repeated, softer this time, as if convincing himself. His cheeks flushed, a child's desperate need to cling to something normal while the world spun out of control. Carter's heart clenched. He wanted to go to him, to crouch down and explain that sometimes the things we think are safe aren't, that sometimes the people we love can't always protect us from what hides in plain sight. But there was no time for that. Shadow barked again, sharp and unyielding, jaws tightening around the lunchbox. The boy flinched, tears springing free. "It's mine," Noah cried, voice breaking. He stepped forward as if to grab it back. Carter reacted instantly, his hand shooting up. "Stop! Stay where you are!" His tone was sharp enough to freeze the boy mid-step. Carter locked eyes with him, steady, unwavering, the look of a man who had carried too many children out of fire. "It's not yours today," Carter said, voice low but carrying. "Trust him." Noah's lips trembled. His gaze darted between Carter's face and the shepherd's rigid frame. Shadow's growl deepened, vibrating across the tiles. A counselor appeared at Noah's side, gently wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go." For a moment, Noah resisted, his small fists clenched, jaw tight with something between fear and shame. Then, slowly, he let himself be guided away, his eyes never leaving the lunchbox, still trapped beneath Shadow's paws. Carter exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. One crisis averted, but the greater one still lay before him. By now, the cafeteria was nearly empty. Only a handful of staff lingered, teachers hovering by the exits, eyes wide with questions they were too afraid to ask. Carter stood slowly, his knees cracking, his hand steady on Shadow's collar. He spoke into the radio clipped at his shoulder. "This is Officer Carter. Cafeteria evacuated. Possible hazardous material. I need hazmat team on site immediately. Lockdown procedures." Static crackled, followed by dispatch confirming. Backup was coming, but Carter knew minutes could feel like hours in moments like this. Shadow shifted, pressing harder onto the box. His breathing came fast now, nostrils flaring, body vibrating with urgency. He wasn't afraid. Carter knew the difference. This was focus, pure and raw, the kind of instinct that saw what human eyes never could. Carter lowered his voice. "You did good, boy. Just hold it there. Don't let go." The fluorescent lights above hummed on, indifferent, illuminating the scene with their sterile glare. The once lively cafeteria looked abandoned now. Half-eaten pizza slices abandoned on trays, juice puddles spreading across tables, the ghost of laughter still hanging in the air. Carter's gaze lingered on the lunchbox. To any outsider, it was harmless, a child's trinket painted with superheroes. But Shadow's unrelenting grip said otherwise. Whatever lay inside was wrong, deadly wrong. He thought of Noah's voice, so small, so certain. "My mom packed it." The innocence in that lie, or perhaps that belief, clawed at Carter's chest. Children trusted too easily, and sometimes monsters knew that. Shadow growled again, deep and vibrating, the sound of a truth no one wanted to face. Carter looked around one last time, confirming the cafeteria was clear. Then he sank to one knee beside his partner, eyes fixed on the gleaming red and blue metal caught between Shadow's teeth. "All right," he whispered into the tense silence. "Let's see what hell we've got here." The silence came first. Minutes ago, the hallways of Maple Hollow Elementary had been alive with the clamor of children, squeaking sneakers, shrill laughter, the constant din of hundreds of young voices bouncing against painted brick. Now the corridors were still, emptied under lockdown protocols drilled into muscle memory. Classroom doors were sealed. Lights dimmed. The only movement came from the flutter of yellow police tape stretched across the cafeteria doors, warning anyone who approached. "Do not enter." Officer Daniel Carter stood just inside that line, his shoulders squared, his senses sharpened in ways that took him back to sand-choked alleys half a world away. His Marine training told him the danger wasn't theoretical. The shepherd at his side confirmed it. Shadow hadn't moved, not 1 inch. The German shepherd crouched low, muscles trembling beneath his coat, every nerve wired tight. His jaws still clamped the red and blue Spider-Man lunchbox, his paws pressing it into the linoleum as if holding a live grenade. Saliva flecked the corners of his mouth, but he hadn't pierced the metal. That kind of restraint, holding something with such precision, resisting instinct, came only from years of training and a bond built on trust. Carter knelt slowly beside him, ignoring the stiffness in his knees. His hand hovered just above the shepherd's neck, close enough to reassure, but careful not to break the dog's focus. "You're okay, partner," he murmured, his voice steady, low, meant only for Shadow's ears. "You've got it under control. I'm right here." Shadow didn't look at him. His dark eyes burned on the box, nostrils twitching with each measured breath. A growl rumbled deep in his chest, so faint it sounded like the hum of a machine left running somewhere far away. Carter swallowed, scanning the room. The cafeteria was empty now, chairs tipped sideways, trays abandoned mid-bite, spilled juice spreading in sticky rivers across the tile. It looked like the aftermath of a storm, evidence of life suddenly interrupted, laughter cut short, innocence shoved aside by something darker. At the far end of the hall, a faint echo carried, boots, radios crackling, voices coordinating. Backup was coming. But until Hazmat arrived, it was just him, Shadow, and a lunchbox that had already turned a Tuesday afternoon into something out of nightmare. He leaned closer, whispering again, more for himself than the dog. "Steady, boy. We'll wait this out together." Shadow's ears flicked, acknowledging, but his body remained taut as wire. His grip never wavered. Carter studied the lunchbox. From the outside, it looked harmless. Just a child's treasure chest, scratched paint, a bent hinge. But Shadow's intensity stripped away any illusion. Whatever was inside, the shepherd knew it didn't belong. Carter had seen Shadow alert on cocaine hidden inside tires, on fentanyl buried under insulation. But this was different. The dog wasn't just alerting, he was guarding, protecting. The yellow tape across the doors rustled faintly as a draft slid through the hall. Carter's eyes flicked toward it, then back to the box. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, a sensation he hadn't felt since Afghanistan, the uncanny certainty that death could be inches away, disguised as something ordinary. He thought of Noah, his small face pale with confusion. "That's my lunch. My mom packed it." Carter had seen the boy's shame as teachers guided him out, seen how he clung to his belief like a shield. The innocence of it hollowed him out, because he knew better. Carter placed a firm hand on Shadow's back, feeling the rise and fall of tight breaths. "You did right," he said softly. "Whatever this is, you stopped it. You saved that kid." Shadow's growl deepened, vibrating against Carter's palm. The shepherd shifted his weight slightly, pressing harder into the box. Carter's jaw clenched. He pulled the radio from his belt, pressing it to his lips. "Dispatch, this is Carter. Cafeteria secured. K9 unit indicates high threat potential. Advise Hazmat. We've got an active containment. Dog holding subject in place." The reply crackled back. "Copy that. Hazmat ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes. An eternity." Carter slid the radio back into place, his gaze never leaving the dog. He lowered his voice again, softer than before. "Just 7 more, Shadow. That's all we need." The cafeteria clock ticked overhead, the sound amplified in the emptiness. Each second dragged, waited. Carter's eyes drifted to the posters on the wall. Hand-drawn rainbows, cut-out letters spelling, "Be kind, be brave." How cruelly ironic that bravery today came in the form of a bark. He shifted, his knees protesting against the hard tile, but he refused to stand. Standing would make the distance between him and Shadow feel greater, and Carter knew his partner needed him close. That was their bond. One held the line, the other kept the calm. Through the glass doors at the far end of the cafeteria, he saw movement. Staff huddled in whispers, eyes darting toward the yellow tape, their faces pale. Parents would soon hear, rumors would spread, panic would grow. But none of that mattered right now. All that mattered was the dog who refused to let go. Shadow's breathing quickened, a short huff escaping his throat. His jaws shifted slightly, tightening around the edge of the box. Carter leaned closer, his voice sharp but calm. Easy. Don't break it. Just hold on. For a moment, he thought Shadow might snap fully, might crush the box in an instant of instinct. But the shepherd's training won out. His body trembled, but he held, iron wrapped in fur and sinew. Carter exhaled slowly, pressing his forehead briefly against the back of Shadow's neck. The contact grounded him, pulled him from the edge of spiraling thoughts. "We're not alone in this," he whispered. "You and me, we've been through worse." The silence pressed in, thick as smoke. Every creak of the building, every hum of the lights, every distant voice seemed magnified, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Shadow remained a statue over the box, a sentinel carved from muscle and instinct. And Carter, crouched beside him, felt the weight of the entire school balanced on 4 paws and a bark that had refused to be ignored. The first sign of their arrival was the clatter of boots on tile, measured and heavy, not the scattered shuffle of teachers or the panicked scurry of children. Officer Carter looked up from where he knelt beside Shadow and saw the hazmat team rounding the corner. 3 figures in full protective suits, white fabric gleaming under fluorescent lights, masks fogged faintly from their own breath. They moved with deliberate slowness, every step calculated, as if the hallway itself might betray them. The sealed helmets gave their presence a surreal, almost alien weight. To the teachers waiting behind the yellow tape, it must have looked like something out of a nightmare. To Carter, it looked like relief with a sharp edge of dread. Shadow didn't lift his head. He remained crouched over the lunchbox, jaws locked tight, muscles trembling with restraint. His growl deepened at the sight of strangers approaching, but Carter pressed a firm hand against his neck. "Steady," he murmured, voice low and grounding. "They're here to help." One of the hazmat officers raised a gloved hand in a silent greeting, then gestured for Carter to step back. Carter shook his head firmly. "Not without him," he said, nodding toward Shadow. "You move the box, he stays locked on it. You'll want him here." The officer gave a brief nod. They had worked with K9 units before. They knew sometimes instinct was the truest detector. The lead technician, identified by the dark stripes across his suit, knelt a few feet from Shadow, a long pair of stainless steel tongs in hand. His movements were steady, deliberate, as if every inch closer might tip the balance. Carter's eyes never left the lunchbox. He'd spent enough years in combat zones to know when something was wrong without needing words. And this box radiated wrong. Not because it hissed or smoked, not because it ticked, but because Shadow, his partner, his soldier in fur, hadn't budged since first contact. "Talk to me," Carter said quietly, though his words were meant for the technician. His own pulse thudded in his ears, steady but heavy. The technician lowered the tongs toward the box. And the moment metal touched metal, Shadow's growls spiked, vibrating across the tile like thunder trapped in a chamber. Carter's grip tightened on the leash, voice firm. "Hold, Shadow, just hold." The technician paused, then shifted his angle. Slowly, carefully, he prodded the surface. A thin sheen of moisture clung to the painted lid. beating into droplets that slid down unnaturally slow. He leaned closer, visor fogging, and Carter caught the muffled words over the comm. Cold. Carter's stomach dropped. The lunchbox had been carried in a backpack, in a room heated by hundreds of bodies and fluorescent bulbs. It should have been warm to the touch, at least neutral, but it wasn't. It radiated chill, like it had been pulled from a freezer moments before, yet no condensation spread to the floor around it. The cold was contained, unnatural. Shadow snarled again, jaws pressing tighter, as though to keep the box pinned to Earth itself. Carter whispered near his ear, "You're right, boy. I see it now." The technician adjusted his grip, sliding the tongs beneath the box, while keeping distance from Shadow's teeth. For a tense heartbeat, Carter thought the shepherd might snap, refusing to let the object go. But after a sharp command, "Shadow, release," the dog's jaws opened reluctantly, lips curling in protest. He stepped back only a fraction, body trembling with reluctance, as if every instinct screamed not to yield. The technician caught the box in the tongs before it could tip. He lifted it slowly, holding it at arm's length. The cafeteria fell into a vacuum of sound. Even Carter's breath seemed too loud. All eyes fixed on the small red and blue box, suspended in the air, like some grotesque relic. The second technician moved forward with a handheld scanner. Lights flickered across its surface, green flashing to yellow, yellow pulsing red. Numbers scrolled across the screen, too fast for Carter to follow. But the clipped tone of the hazmat officer's muttered report made his chest tighten. Anomalous readings. Unknown compound. High volatility possible. The box was set gently onto a portable containment tray. Clear, reinforced plastic with clamps that sealed like jaws around it. The sound of the lock clicking shut echoed through the cafeteria like a gavel striking judgment. Only then did Shadow ease back another step, though his body still trembled with energy, eyes locked on the sealed container as if daring it to move again. Carter stroked his neck, his own hand damp with sweat, despite the cool draft of the air system. "You did it," he whispered, though it felt hollow. They hadn't solved anything yet. They had only contained the question. The lead technician turned toward him, voice muffled through the mask. "We'll need a mobile lab set up immediately. Whatever's in there, it doesn't belong in a school cafeteria." Carter nodded, jaw tight. His gaze shifted toward the hallway, where faint sobs of children still echoed from the gymnasium. He thought of Noah's small voice. "That's my lunch." He thought of Rachel Bennett, who would soon arrive frantic, swearing she'd packed nothing. He thought of the trust shattered in the space of a bark. The box, now sealed, sat motionless inside the container, its red and blue paint dulled by the plastic barrier. To anyone else, it looked ordinary. To Carter, it looked like a coffin waiting to be named. Shadow pressed his nose against the edge of the container, a low whine escaping his throat. It was not a relief. It was warning still, as if he knew the fight was only beginning. Carter tightened his grip on the leash, forcing himself to breathe. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Noon had barely passed. The day was already longer than most years. And somewhere deep inside he knew the bark that had torn through the cafeteria wasn't just a warning. It was the sound of a truth clawing its way into the light. The mobile lab whirred to life in the back of the hazmat truck, its generators thrumming through the pavement outside Maple Hollow Elementary. Inside the cafeteria, the hum of fluorescent lights was joined by the low crackle of radios, the clipped voices of technicians, and the restless shuffle of boots. Carter stood at the edge of the containment zone. Shadow sitting firm at his side, eyes locked on the sealed plastic container where the Spider-Man lunchbox now sat. The shepherd had not relaxed, not truly. His body was angled forward, chest rising with shallow, tense breaths. Every so often, a growl rippled from him, low and steady, as if he knew the danger hadn't yet been named. Minutes stretched thin. Carter's gaze followed the hazmat officers as they worked. Gloved hands steady, instruments flickering, every gesture deliberate. He had lived long enough in war zones to recognize that peculiar silence, the quiet before truth was spoken, the kind of quiet that made men clench their teeth because the answer was always worse than they wanted to hear. Finally, one of the technicians, a woman with sharp eyes visible through the fog of her mask, stepped back from the scanner. She pulled off her gloves with a snap, her voice muffled but urgent. "Confirmed reading," she said to the lead. "Thallium nitrate." The words hit Carter like a blow to the chest. His breath caught, slow and heavy, his gut twisting into a knot. Thallium nitrate. He knew the name, though barely. A chemical compound used in pesticides, rodenticides, industrial-grade poison. Tasteless, odorless, silent. Enough in that lunchbox to kill not just one boy, but several. His mind flicked instantly to Noah, his small hands unwrapping that sandwich with quiet care, his faint smile when he thought he had something of his own. Carter's throat tightened. If Shadow hadn't barked, if the shepherd hadn't refused to let go, the boy would already be slipping into convulsions. By nightfall, he'd be in a coma. By morning, dead. He pressed a palm hard against his thigh, grounding himself. Marines didn't shake. Marines didn't falter. But inside, something cracked. He'd seen soldiers bleed out on foreign soil, seen children caught in crossfire. But here, in a cafeteria painted with handprints and posters about kindness, the idea of a child dying silently over a peanut butter sandwich struck deeper than any battlefield. The technician continued, her tone clipped. Highly toxic in even trace amounts. Odorless, no visible taste markers. Exposure orally is almost always fatal. She didn't need to say the rest. Carter already knew. He looked down at Shadow. The dog sat rigid, tail still, eyes dark pools reflecting the sealed container. "You knew," Carter whispered, voice hoarse. "You damn well knew." The shepherd tilted his head slightly, ears pricked, as if to acknowledge. Carter's jaw locked, grinding tight. He turned back to the team. "Tell me straight. If that kid had eaten..." The technician hesitated, then gave a short nod. "He wouldn't have survived the day." The cafeteria seemed to contract, walls closing in. The bright posters taped to the wall blurred in Carter's vision, their cheerful colors mocking the weight of the moment. Outside, the faint chatter of children waiting in the gymnasium carried through vents, muffled but present, a reminder of what he had nearly lost. Noah. The boy's voice echoed in his memory. "That's my lunch. My mom packed it. Except she hadn't." Carter's mind looped back to Rachel Bennett, a tired single mother working long shifts. A woman who swore she hadn't packed food that morning, had only given her son a few crumpled bills for cafeteria pizza. So where had the box come from? Carter exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. The first seed of horror rooted itself deep in his chest. A realization darker than the poison itself. The lunchbox had been planted. Someone had brought it here, deliberately. Someone had chosen Noah, or at least chosen his seat, as the stage for a murder, disguised as an ordinary meal. He forced his voice steady. "Lock the box. Double seal it. I want it treated like a weapon." Already in process, the lead officer confirmed, gesturing to reinforced cases being prepared. Shadow whined faintly, a sound so rare and raw it cut through Carter like glass. He crouched beside the shepherd, fingers pressing lightly against the fur at his neck. "We stopped it," he whispered. "We stopped it today." But in his gut, he knew it wasn't enough. Stopping the act didn't erase the intent. Somewhere out there, a hand had packed that sandwich, had placed it inside a child's lunchbox, had left it waiting like a landmine in the middle of a school. Carter straightened slowly. His spine ached with the weight of memory. Afghanistan, Iraq, the countless moments when survival hinged on noticing what others missed. And now, in this quiet town, in this school filled with laughter, his partner had noticed. He caught his reflection faintly in the cafeteria's glass door. A tired man, creases carved deep into his brow, eyes shadowed by years of war that never really ended. For the first time in months, he felt that same raw tension prickling under his skin. The awareness that evil didn't always come with uniforms or flags. Sometimes, it came in the shape of a lunchbox, painted with a superhero's grin. Behind him, the technician sealed the container, clamps snapping into place. The sound echoed like finality. Carter reached for his radio again, his voice clipped. No room for hesitation. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. Confirm hazardous material identified as thallium nitrate. Request immediate involvement of county investigators. Treat as attempted poisoning." The reply was brief, tense. "Copy that." Shadow leaned against his leg, weight grounding him. Carter's fingers brushed through the shepherd's fur, grateful, aching. "If he'd eaten it," Carter muttered, almost to himself, "I'd be writing a death report right now." But he wasn't, because Shadow had refused to be ignored. For a moment, Carter closed his eyes, letting the sound of the dog's steady breathing anchor him. Around them, the cafeteria remained sealed in yellow tape, its silence heavy, almost sacred. Outside, the children's voices rose and fell in muffled waves, life continuing, unaware of how close death had sat at their table. Carter opened his eyes again, the weight in his chest settling into resolve. This wasn't just a chemical incident. This was a crime. And crimes had perpetrators. The question now wasn't what was in the box. It was who had put it there. The sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence before she appeared. Down the corridor beyond the yellow tape, heels clattered against linoleum, uneven and frantic, the rhythm of someone running without thought for who was watching. Then came the voice, sharp, cracked, raw with panic. "Noah! Where's my son? Where's Noah?" Rachel Bennett burst into view, her grocery store apron still tied crooked at her waist, hair pulled back hastily, strands flying loose around her face. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold outside, but her skin was pale beneath it, dread hollowing her eyes. She skidded to a stop at the sight of the tape, at the officers posted there, her chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. "Please," she stammered, her hands trembling as she gripped the strap of her purse. "I got the call. I came straight. Where's my boy?" Carter stepped forward before anyone else could speak. He'd seen that look too many times before, in war zones, in emergency rooms, on the faces of parents who knew something was wrong but didn't yet know how wrong. "He's safe," Carter said quickly, voice firm but softened at the edges. "He's in the gym with the other kids. He's okay." Rachel's knees seemed to buckle with relief, her hand pressed to her chest, a shuddered breath escaping. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, her eyes wet. But then she looked past Carter, into the cafeteria beyond the tape, where Shadow still sat rigid over the sealed container. The shepherd's gaze remained locked, his body taut with the residue of his earlier fury. Beside him, the hazmat team moved with quiet urgency. The sight drained the relief from Rachel's face, replacing it with fresh fear. "What happened?" she demanded, voice trembling. Someone said, his lunch?" Carter hesitated. He had learned long ago that sometimes the truth was a weapon, and sometimes it was the only shield you could give. Here, with this mother standing on the edge of collapse, the truth would cut deep. But she needed it. "There was a lunchbox at his table," Carter said, choosing each word with care. Shadow picked up on it immediately. It contained something dangerous. It was removed before Noah ate anything. Rachel's lips parted, her hands rising instinctively to cover her mouth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that can't be right." She looked at Carter, desperation in her eyes. "I didn't pack him a lunch today. I swear to you I didn't." Carter studied her face, the lines of exhaustion beneath her eyes, the raw sincerity in her voice. This wasn't the denial of guilt. This was the denial of someone who knew she hadn't been given the chance to protect her child. "I believe you," Carter said. His voice was steady, though the weight of her words pressed hard against his chest. Rachel gripped her purse tighter, her knuckles white. "I overslept," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was late for my shift. I gave him lunch money, just lunch money. Told him to get pizza from the cafeteria like always." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Behind the tape, the hazmat team sealed the container with the efficiency of professionals, but the noise of their locks and clamps seemed distant now. The true sound was Rachel's breathing, sharp and uneven, the unraveling of a mother realizing how close she had come to losing everything. Her knees buckled again, and Carter caught her by the arm before she collapsed fully. "Easy," he said quietly. "Take a breath. He's alive. That's what matters right now." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling hot down her cheeks. She looked at him, pleading. "If I didn't pack it, then who did?" The question carved itself into Carter's gut. He had already thought it, already feared it. The box hadn't come from Rachel, which meant it had come from somewhere else, someone else. It hadn't been an accident. It had been placed, deliberately. Shadow gave a sharp grunt, breaking the silence, his amber eyes still locked on the sealed box. It was as if he, too, understood the weight of Rachel's words. Carter tightened his grip on her arm, steadying her. "That's what we're going to find out," he said. Rachel shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "He's just a boy. He's just 8 years old. Why would anyone want to hurt him?" Carter didn't answer, because there was no answer that could soothe the terror clawing at her. He had seen it before, in villages where children stepped on mines meant for soldiers, in cities where hatred poisoned everything it touched. Sometimes evil didn't need a reason. Sometimes it only needed opportunity. Rachel covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs. Carter stood beside her, his hand resting gently against her back, eyes fixed on Shadow. The shepherd hadn't moved since the moment he first lunged for the box. His loyalty, his vigilance, was absolute. Carter knew in his bones that without him, Rachel would be facing not fear, but grief. "Your boy's alive because of him," Carter said softly, his eyes still on Shadow. Rachel lowered her hands, following his gaze. Her tears blurred her vision, but she managed a whisper, thick with gratitude and disbelief. "He saved my son?" Carter nodded once. "He did. For the first time since she arrived, Rachel's sobs broke into something else. A quiet, trembling laugh, the kind that comes only from the edge of disaster. She pressed a hand to her mouth again, shaking her head. "I don't even know how to thank him." "You don't have to," Carter said. His hand brushed Shadow's neck, grounding himself. "That's his job, and he takes it more seriously than most men I've ever known." Rachel's gaze drifted back toward the sealed container, her face tightening with fear again. "But if I didn't pack it?" Her words trailed off, unfinished, but heavy with implication. Carter's jaw set. He could feel the seed of horror rooting deeper, twining into something darker. This wasn't about one boy and one lunchbox. It was about intent. Someone had brought poison into a school. Someone had chosen to risk children's lives. And they weren't finished until he found them. The corridor outside the cafeteria had grown colder, though the heating vents still hummed along the ceiling. Maybe it was the draft sneaking in through the side doors, or maybe it was the way fear seemed to drain the warmth from the air. Teachers huddled near the yellow tape, whispering in voices too thin to carry. Their faces were pale, eyes darting between the sealed cafeteria doors and Officer Carter, as though expecting him to deliver an answer that hadn't yet formed. Rachel's words still hung in the air like smoke. "I didn't pack him lunch. I only gave him money." Carter's chest tightened. He saw the dawning horror ripple across the adults' faces. They knew what it meant. If Rachel spoke the truth, and Carter had no reason to doubt her, then the lunchbox had been planted. Not forgotten, not misplaced, planted. The teachers shifted uncomfortably, the realization cutting into their silence like a knife. Miss Alvarez, the counselor, pressed a trembling hand against her lips. Principal Harrington, sweat beading along his hairline, looked at Carter with hollow eyes, searching for words but finding none. The weight of what this implied was too heavy to say aloud, and so they stood in silence, all of them thinking the same thing, none of them brave enough to voice it. It was then that Noah's small voice slipped through the cracks. "But I thought..." Every adult turned, startled. They hadn't noticed him standing there. He was wrapped in the woolen school blanket a counselor had given him earlier, its edges dragging against the floor. But the boy looked smaller still, swallowed by its folds. His face was pale, freckles standing out against his skin, his eyes wide, as if the world had just tilted beneath him. Noah stared at his mother, his lips trembling. "I thought you packed it," he whispered, confusion bleeding into shame. His cheeks flushed bright red, the way they always did when he was caught answering a question wrong in class. I told everyone you made it for me." Rachel's breath caught. She stepped toward him quickly, hands outstretched. "No, baby. No, I didn't. I gave you money this morning, remember? For pizza." But the boy shook his head stubbornly, the flush spreading deeper. "I saw it on the table, the Spider-Man lunchbox. It looked like it was mine." His voice cracked, barely audible. "I wanted it to be mine." The hallway went deathly quiet. Even the radios crackling on the officer's shoulders seemed to fade. Carter felt the silence sink into his bones. The child's words were so simple, so painfully innocent, yet they carried the weight of everything unspoken. Noah hadn't lied. He had hoped. He had seen something he wanted, something normal and bright, something other kids had, and he had claimed it as his own because pretending was easier than admitting he never had one. The shame on his face carved into Carter's chest. This wasn't the guilt of a boy caught misbehaving. This was the humiliation of a child realizing he had made himself a target simply by wanting too much. Rachel crouched in front of her son, tears streaking down her face. She cupped his cheeks with shaking hands. "Noah, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. That lunchbox wasn't yours. It wasn't meant for you, and thank God Shadow knew it." Her voice broke on the shepherd's name, raw with gratitude and fear. Noah blinked rapidly, but the tears spilled anyway. He bit his lip, shaking his head, whispering so softly Carter almost missed it. "But everyone saw. Everyone thinks I lied." The teachers glanced at one another, shame settling in their expressions. They had all assumed, too. Carter saw it, the guilt etched into their faces, the realization that they hadn't seen Noah at all until danger made him visible. Carter knelt down beside them, his voice steady, though his throat felt tight. "Hey, kiddo, look at me." Noah's watery eyes lifted reluctantly. "You didn't lie," Carter said firmly. "You saw something on that table, and you believed it was yours. That doesn't make you wrong. It makes you human. And if anyone thinks different, they'll have to answer to me, and to him." He nodded toward Shadow, who sat a few feet away, still fixed on the sealed box behind the glass. The shepherd's ears twitched, as though listening. Noah's gaze drifted to the dog. For the first time since the chaos began, a flicker of something softer, something like relief, crossed his face. He reached a hand out of the blanket, fingers curling in the air, hesitant. Shadow's head turned. Slowly, deliberately, the shepherd padded forward until his nose brushed the boy's knuckles. The contact was gentle, grounding. Noah exhaled a shaky breath, leaning into it. Rachel's sobs returned, this time muffled as she buried her face against her son's shoulder. Carter rose back to his feet, his jaw locked tight, his chest heavy. He looked around the hallway again, at the pale faces of the teachers, at the trembling mother, at the boy who had nearly died for no reason at all. The silence was suffocating. It wasn't the silence of calm, it was the silence of realization. The silence of adults forced them to reckon with the truth. Someone had meant harm, someone had brought poison into their school, and a child had almost become collateral. Principal Harrington cleared his throat, his voice thin, almost a whisper. We'll need to make a statement." Carter's eyes snapped to him, sharp. "Not yet." "But the district—" "Not yet," Carter repeated, his tone cutting. "Not until we know who did this." The weight in his words silenced even the principal. Carter looked down the hallway again, his gaze settling on Shadow. The dog sat tall now, still, eyes locked not on the boy, but on the cafeteria doors. Watching, waiting, as though he knew the real danger hadn't passed. It had only shifted shape. Carter exhaled slowly, the heaviness in his chest deepening. The weight of silence had become unbearable, not just for Noah, but for all of them. The silence said what no one dared to voice. The monster who packed that lunchbox was still out there, and the school was no longer safe. And for the first time that day, Carter felt the ground tilt beneath him. Not from fear, but from the burden of knowing he had to find the truth before silence turned into grief. The hallway outside the cafeteria felt too bright, the fluorescent lights buzzing like an unkind spotlight over a stage none of them had wanted. The yellow tape stretched across the doors behind Carter, quivered faintly in the draft from the vents. Beyond it, sealed inside reinforced plastic, the Spider-Man lunchbox sat like an accusation. But Carter's eyes weren't on the box anymore. They were on the boy. Noah clung to Shadow's thick neck with both arms, burying his face in the shepherd's fur, as if it were the only solid thing left in his world. His small frame shook under the weight of emotions too big for him to name. Fear, shame, confusion, all tangled in the trembling of his shoulders. His wide eyes peeked out only once, glancing at the adults gathered, before retreating back into Shadow's fur, cheeks burning with humiliation. Carter crouched slowly, lowering himself until he was at the boy's level. His knees ached, but he ignored it. This wasn't about him. "Noah," he said softly, careful to keep his voice even, steady, the way he had once spoken to young soldiers fresh from their first firefight. "Look at me, buddy." The boy didn't move at first. He only clutched tighter, fingers gripping Shadow's collar until his knuckles blanched. Shadow stood utterly still, letting the child hold on, his tail motionless, his chest rising in calm rhythm. The shepherd's eyes flicked briefly toward Carter, then back to the boy, as if to say, "He needs me more than you do right now." Carter reached out and placed a steady hand on Noah's back, just between his shoulder blades. He could feel the shallow, rapid breaths under his palm. "You're safe," he murmured. "Do you hear me? You're safe." He made sure of that. At the word "he," Noah's grip loosened slightly, his head lifting just enough for his tear-streaked face to turn toward Shadow. The dog met his gaze calmly, dark amber eyes patient, unblinking. For a long moment, the boy just stared into them, as if searching for the truth the adults couldn't give him. Then Noah whispered, his voice raw, "Everyone thinks I lied." The words sliced through the silence. Rachel stifled a sob, pressing her hand to her mouth. The teachers averted their eyes, shame washing over their faces. They had all assumed too quickly, judged too easily. Carter leaned closer, his voice low but firm, meant for Noah alone. "You didn't lie," he said. "You thought it was yours, and that's not the same thing. You didn't do anything wrong. Do you understand?" Noah shook his head, tears welling again. "But I said it was mine." "I told them." Carter's hand pressed gently but firmly against the boy's back. "That doesn't make it your fault. Sometimes grown-ups don't see the difference, but I do. And Shadow does too. If he thought you were lying, he wouldn't be here with you now." Shadow nudged the boy's chin with his nose, a soft, grounding gesture. Noah sniffled and clutched him tighter, the faintest smile tugging at his lips through the tears. Carter exhaled slowly. The sight of the child's fragile dignity crumbling in front of so many watchful eyes twisted something deep inside him. He had seen hardened Marines break down less visibly, but Noah was only 8. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to bear the weight of suspicion, of humiliation, of almost becoming a headline. Rachel dropped to her knees beside her son, pulling him into her arms while he still clung to Shadow. Her tears dampened his hair as she whispered, "You're mine. That's what matters." "You're mine, and you're here," her voice cracked, but she held him with a strength born of desperation. Noah didn't let go of Shadow, though. His arm stayed looped around the dog's neck, his cheek pressed against warm fur, as if Shadow were the anchor between the storm of shame and the fragile safety of his mother's embrace. Carter's throat tightened. He looked away briefly, staring down the hallway to regain his composure. The walls were lined with colorful student artwork, crayon drawings of superheroes, animals, smiling stick families. The irony gnawed at him. In a school where children dreamed of heroes, the real hero wore a service vest and answered not with words, but with a bark. Ms. Alvarez stepped forward, her face pale, her voice gentle. "Noah, sweetie, no one blames you." But the way her voice wavered betrayed the guilt underneath. Carter's jaw clenched. He straightened, his gaze sweeping over the cluster of teachers. "Listen to me," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut through their unease. "This boy did nothing wrong. He's alive because of Shadow, not because of anything you assumed. If I hear one more whisper about him lying, You'll answer to me. Is that clear? The teachers nodded quickly, chastened. Silence reclaimed the hall. Rachel kissed the crown of her son's head, whispering promises into his hair. Noah's trembling slowed, though his grip on Shadow never loosened. His wide eyes blinked slowly, exhaustion setting in after the adrenaline storm. He leaned more heavily into the shepherd, as though trusting Shadow to carry the weight he could no longer hold. Carter crouched again, lowering his voice so only the boy could hear. "You were brave," he said. "Don't ever forget that. Being scared and still standing there, that's bravery. And you've got more of it than most men I've met." Noah's lips parted, a question trembling at the edge. "But what if it was for me?" His voice was so small it nearly broke Carter. Carter swallowed hard. He didn't have the answer, not yet. He couldn't promise something he wasn't sure of. So he told the truth, the only truth he could give. Then they didn't count on Shadow, and that's where they were wrong. Shadow gave a low, almost approving grunt, pressing closer against the boy. Noah's tears slowed, replaced by a quiet calm that only came from the certainty of being protected. For Carter, the moment branded itself deep. A child clinging to a dog's neck, his fragile dignity shattered, but held together by fur and trust. The image burned with a mix of grief and gratitude. Grief for the innocence already lost, gratitude for the life still held. And beneath it all, Carter felt the weight settle heavier on his own shoulders. Someone had meant for this child to be hurt, or worse. The boy's shame, his tears, were just the first fractures of a larger truth waiting to break open. Carter rose slowly, his eyes lingering on the boy, then shifting to the sealed cafeteria doors. The echo of Shadow's first bark still rang in his ears. It had been more than a warning. It had been a revelation. And now, with a child's fragile dignity in pieces, Carter knew one thing with absolute clarity. The real fight was only beginning. By late afternoon, the school had settled into an eerie calm. Children were evacuated to the gym, parents called, and administrators rehearsed careful statements. But in the dim IT office behind the library, the air stayed heavy with what had nearly happened. Officer Daniel Carter sat hunched over a desk of tangled cables and outdated monitors. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. Beside him, Curtis Dwyer, the district's IT specialist, tapped nervously, caffeine fueling his jittery rhythm. "Cafeteria footage, camera 4, timestamp 11:53, Curtis muttered. Carter leaned forward as the grainy black and white video flickered. Students moved in and out of frame, lunch trays, chatter, the custodian cleaning a table. "Keep it rolling," Carter said quietly. Curtis fast-forwarded, then froze. There. Side entrance. A hooded figure slipped into view, small build, backpack slung casually. The steps were brisk, purposeful. The figure crossed straight to the back corner and set down a Spider-Man lunchbox, Noah's table. With quick precision, they turned and walked out. Curtis slowed the playback. Pixels broke apart into shadows. "That's the best we've got. Camera 6 has been offline all week. This resolution's garbage." "Zoom in," Carter ordered. The image blurred further. No clear face, just the faint outline of a hood. Male, maybe. Female, maybe. Too indistinct. Curtis sighed. "At best we can guess height, build, gait." "Guessing doesn't save kids," Carter muttered, jaw tight. He replayed the clip, studying the stride. Quick. Confidence. Whoever it was knew where to go and what table to choose. That chilled him more than the poison itself. "Rewind again," he said. Curtis obeyed, each time the same 20-second window. Entrance, placement, Exit. No hesitation. No lingering. Deliberate. Carter exhaled slowly. You're telling me someone walked in with a poisoned lunchbox, planted it, and no one noticed? Noise, chaos, teachers distracted. It's easy to blend in when no one's looking, Curtis said grimly. I don't buy it. Someone had to see. Curtis pulled up hallway footage. The figure appeared again, just a blur at the frame's edge, stride measured, calculated. Still no clear face. Height, maybe 5 foot, 5'2". Could be a student, Curtis guessed. Carter's stomach sank. He'd hoped for an outsider. Instead, the clues pointed inward, a child carrying death into a cafeteria of children. More footage showed only fragments, a blur of a backpack, a shadow of a hood. Whoever had done this had slipped perfectly through blind spots. Carter clenched his fist. He'd pieced together fragments before, in deserts with roadside bombs, in cities with hidden snipers, but this was no battlefield. This was a school, and the enemy had to be someone known, trusted enough to pass unnoticed. On the frozen frame, the figure's hand lingered a second too long on the lunchbox, sealing the act with intent. That was no prank. It was a message. Curtis said quietly, I'll keep trying filters, but don't get your hopes up. It's like reading a license plate through fog. Carter stood stiffly, glancing at Shadow, the shepherd lying near the doorway. The dog's steady gaze seemed to understand. The footage wasn't enough. Not yet. Blurry or not, that's our suspect, Carter said. And until I know who it is, every kid in this school is in danger. By the time Carter stepped into the hallway, whispers had already begun. Teachers huddled in nervous clusters, fear searching for a name. I heard it was one of our kids. Looked about 6th grade, maybe 7th. There's only a few that size. Principal Harrington's face was pale, sweat at his temples. Daniel, he whispered. Some staff think it might be Ethan Miles. The name carried weight. Even before this, it was spoken uneasily. On what basis? Carter asked. You know his history. Too smart for his own good. And after what happened with his brother. Harrington faltered. But Carter knew. Everyone did. Jeremy Miles, Ethan's older brother, expelled last year for pills hidden in notebooks, sold behind bleachers. It had made headlines, forced wellness assemblies. And with Jeremy's fall came a shadow over Ethan. He's nothing like Jeremy, a teacher muttered, uncertain. But still, sharp, too sharp. Sharp can be dangerous, another added. Carter said nothing, only listened. He knew boys like Ethan, angry, clever, defiant, the kind who smirked at authority. Dangerous not for recklessness, but for calculation. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. He thought of the blurry stride in the video. Could be Ethan. Could be others. A young teacher whispered harshly. Ethan blames the school for Jeremy. Maybe this is revenge. Too neat, Carter thought. The kind of story fear loves. A younger brother with a grudge, clever enough to poison. But his instincts whispered caution. Truth wasn't born from rumor. Where is he now? Library, the principal said reluctantly. He hides there when things get chaotic. Carter nodded. Ethan Miles, 12, bright, angry, easy to blame. But was he capable of this? His instincts told him 2 things. Never underestimate an enemy, and never let suspicion blind you. Shadow sat steady at his side, eyes scanning the tense teachers. Carter looked down at him. Looks like we've got someone to talk to, he murmured. The dog's tail twitched in agreement, but unease settled heavier. A community could turn on a name, especially one already carrying a brother's sins. Sometimes suspicion was as dangerous as the crime itself. The library was hushed, the scent of old paper hanging thick. Carter sat at a table, laptop replaying the blurry footage. Hooded figure, lunchbox, pixels dissolving into shadows. Still not enough. He leaned back, arms folded. Whispers of Ethan Miles clung to him, the verdict already forming among staff. But whispers weren't evidence. Memory tugged at him. Nights in the desert, orange fires lighting interrogation lines. He recalled a boy, no older than Noah, nearly condemned because suspicion said he stared too long, ran when he should have walked. Carter had seen fear in his eyes, not hatred. He'd stepped in, saved him from becoming another casualty of prejudice. Later, intelligence confirmed the boy was innocent. That memory haunted him now. Suspicion could save lives, but prejudice could destroy the innocent. At his feet, shadow stirred. The shepherd's restlessness mirrored Carter's unease. "You feel it too, don't you?" Carter whispered. The dog gave a soft huff, nose twitching, not at ease, waiting. Carter stared again at the frozen figure. Suspicion said Ethan. Prejudice agreed, but instinct said, tread carefully. From the far doors, students drifted out, voices light with relief at early dismissal. Their laughter should have been comforting. Instead, it weighed on him. He thought of Noah, whispering, "I thought it was mine." Of Rachel insisting she'd packed nothing. And now Ethan Miles, bright, angry, easy to blame. Too easy. His instincts pulled two ways. Act fast, because hesitation cost lives. But think carefully, because rushing costs souls. Shadow's ears twitched toward the hall. Carter reached down, grounding himself in the shepherd's steady presence. "Yeah, it's not that simple." The laptop screen dimmed, frozen frame fading to black. Carter closed it. Pixels and rumors weren't truth. He dropped his head into his hands, voice low, almost prayerful. "Suspicion can save a life. But if I let it blind me, I'll ruin one instead. And I won't destroy another boy just because it's easy." Shadow pressed his head against Carter's knee, anchoring him. The truth would come. It always did. But it would take patience, courage, and the will to see past what everyone else wanted to believe. Until then, Carter carried both fears, that Ethan was guilty, and the greater fear that he wasn't. The library was nearly empty when Carter entered. Afternoon light fell in pale stripes across shelves heavy with dust, the hum of fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly overhead. Only one boy remained in the back corner, slouched low in his chair as though daring the world to notice him. Ethan Miles, 12 years old, but already carrying himself with the weary defiance of someone twice that. Hoodie pulled low, headphones slack around his neck, a book abandoned on his lap, sneakers tapping a restless rhythm on the carpet. Carter stopped a few feet away. Shadow, the shepherd, moved with him, ears pricked, eyes steady on the boy. Ethan didn't look up. His mouth curled into a smirk. "Let me guess," he said. "You're here to arrest me for bringing a peanut butter sandwich." Carter sat across from him, the wood creaking. Shadow stretched between them, head down, but eyes locked on Ethan. "I didn't bring bombs to school either," Ethan added, sarcasm sharp. "Funny thing to joke about," Carter said evenly. "Considering what we found today." Ethan shrugged, feigning indifference. "Everyone's already whispering my name. Might as well lean into it." The smirk faltered, revealing something brittle underneath. Carter let the silence hang. He knew from experience that quiet did more work than threats. Ethan shifted, tapping harder. "So what?" the boy sneered. You think I waltzed in with a poisoned lunchbox? Some criminal mastermind at 12? I don't think anything yet, Carter replied. I know someone put that box on Noah's table, and I know your name makes people suspicious. That cracked Ethan's mask. You mean Jeremy, he snapped. Your brother made his choices, Carter said. This is about you. Ethan's voice dropped, bitter. School never saw it that way. To them, I'm just a mini version. One screw-up away from expulsion. One rumor away from being Jeremy 2.0. So why not blame me for this too? Easy target. Shadow shifted, nostrils twitching. Carter's hand brushed the dog's fur, grounding himself. You're right, Carter said finally. Convenience makes easy suspects, and easy suspects usually aren't the truth. But if you know anything about that lunchbox, you need to tell me. Ethan's eyes sparked with defiance. And if I don't, then I'll keep asking, Carter said simply. Because the truth always comes out. The boy looked away, tapping slower now. Silence stretched. Then he muttered, almost too soft to hear. It wasn't for that kid. Carter froze, his face unreadable though his pulse spiked. Shadow's ears flicked sharply at the change in tone. What did you just say? Carter asked. Nothing. Forget it, Ethan muttered, too fast. You said it wasn't for Noah, Carter pressed, voice calm but firmer. Who was it for? Ethan's jaw locked, eyes averted. His silence screamed louder than words. You didn't plant it, Carter said slowly, reading the boy's face. But you know who did. Ethan's fists tightened. I didn't plant it. His voice cracked raw, too jagged to be rehearsed. Shadow rose, tail stiff, a low growl humming in his chest. Ethan flinched. Carter leaned forward, voice cutting low. You almost let another kid die today, Ethan. That wasn't a prank. That was thallium nitrate. Odorless, tasteless. By the time symptoms show, it's too late. You don't teach lessons with thallium. You bury children. Ethan's bravado crumbled. His eyes widened, then narrowed again. That's not what I was told. Someone had lied to him, Carter realized. Someone had twisted this boy's anger into a weapon he didn't understand. Ethan's sneaker tapped slower, uneven. Finally his voice cracked out bitter. Dalton. The name dropped heavy in the quiet. Mr. Dalton, Carter repeated. The substitute? Ethan's head snapped up, eyes blazing. Don't say it like that. Like he's just some teacher. He's the one who ruined everything. Explain. Words spilled now, anger stripping restraint. Jeremy was fine. He had plans. He was helping us. Then Dalton showed up, acting like he cared about rules, like he cared about kids. He snitched. He's the reason Jeremy got expelled. Jeremy got expelled because he was dealing pills, Carter said flatly. Dalton didn't ruin him. Jeremy made his own choices. Ethan's fists clenched, his voice cracking. He wouldn't have been caught if Dalton hadn't opened his mouth. Teachers are supposed to help, not destroy families. Shadow huffed, ears angling back at the sharpness in the boy's tone. Carter steadied himself with a touch to the dog's fur. So you think Dalton deserved that lunchbox? Carter asked. You think poisoning him would make things right? Not like that, Ethan muttered. His bravado had drained into unease. It wasn't supposed to. Kill him. Carter's gut twisted. He'd heard the same line from insurgents overseas. Roadside bombs weren't meant to kill, just to send messages. He'd buried men because of messages. Ethan, someone fed you lies. Thallium doesn't make people sick. It kills them. You nearly put Noah in the ground because you were too blinded by hate to question it. The boy's eyes flickered. Recognition. He hadn't known. not fully. His fists loosened slightly, his gaze falling to the table. For a moment, the mask dropped, leaving not a villain, but a grieving boy. Angry, lost, manipulated. "You want someone to blame," Carter said, his voice softer now. "But don't mistake anger for justice. Anger makes you reckless. Justice requires truth, and the truth is, Jeremy chose his path. Right now, you're standing at the edge of choosing yours." Ethan's voice came small. "Doesn't matter. Everyone's already decided who I am." Carter exhaled heavily. He did know what that felt like. He'd seen boys broken under judgment before they had a chance to prove themselves. Some lashed out. Some were crushed. A few were saved. When someone reached instead of condemned. "Maybe they have," Carter admitted. "But you still decide who you'll be when this is over." For the first time, Ethan's eyes flicked up, uncertain. But he stayed silent. Carter rose. Shadow rose with him, steady as stone. "Think about what I said," Carter told him. "Because right now, you're closer to destroying yourself than anyone else." At the door, Ethan's voice came after him, bitter and low. If Dalton had just kept his mouth shut, none of this would have happened. Carter closed his eyes for a beat. Anger twisted into poison. Blame twisted into justification. He stepped out into the hall, but the echo followed him, cold and heavy. It wasn't for that kid. The halls of Maple Hollow Elementary had fallen into an uneasy hush. The smell of disinfectant lingered, but it couldn't wash away the day's fear. Carter walked the corridor with Shadow at his side, the shepherd's nails clicking softly against the linoleum. It was the kind of silence that I remembered too much. At the far end of the science wing, Ms. Halverson sat alone in her classroom. Her silver hair had slipped from its clip, her lab coat still buttoned, though the day was over. She looked up as Carter knocked. "Officer Carter." "I was expecting you." Shadow padded in first, circling the supply cabinet before settling back at Carter's feet. "I heard what he did," Mrs. Halverson said. "That dog saved a boy's life today." "And nearly lost it too," Carter replied. "Someone left poison in a lunchbox, thallium nitrate." Her eyes flickered. Recognition, not surprise. "You know it," Carter said. She sighed, gesturing for him to sit. "We had a spill last year. Advanced elective. Small group of 7th and 8th graders. We kept rare compounds for demonstrations, thallium nitrate among them. After the incident, I filed an inventory. We were missing vials." Carter's chest tightened. "Stolen?" "I reported it. The district said it was a labeling error. Easier to believe in clerical mistakes than theft." She paused, regret heavy in her voice. "But I knew better. Who had access? Any of those kids? Bright ones? Restless? The kind who think formulas make them invincible." She hesitated, then spoke the name like a burden. "Ethan Miles." Carter closed his eyes briefly. Ethan again. His slip in the library, "It wasn't for that kid," echoed louder now. "He's just a boy," Carter said, though the words felt hollow. Ms. Halverson's gaze was steady. "So was Oppenheimer once." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Shadow's steady breathing. "I should have pushed harder," she whispered. "If I had—" "This isn't on you," Carter said firmly. "The blame belongs to whoever set the trap." When he rose to leave, she stopped him. "Promise me you'll follow that dog's instincts as much as the evidence. Animals see what we don't." Carter glanced down at Shadow's amber eyes. "That's the plan." The science wing was nearly deserted as Carter turned toward the art room. Ms. Halverson's words weighed heavy. Missing vials, Ethan's name, a story that fit too neatly. And when stories looked neat, he'd learned there was always a mess beneath. He pushed the art room door open. The air smelled of clay and paint, sun slanting across jars of brushes and racks of canvases. Only one student remained. Kayla Owens. Small, withdrawn, swallowed by an oversized sweatshirt, strands of chestnut hair veiling her face. She hunched over a canvas, paint smeared across her fingers. Shadow halted at the door, nose twitching, eyes fixed on her. "Kayla?" Carter said softly. She flinched, guilt flashing in her wide eyes. "Am I in trouble?" "Not trouble. Just need to talk." He nodded toward her canvas. "May I sit?" She shifted it aside. Carter pulled up a stool. Shadow lay down between them, calm but watchful. On the canvas was a cafeteria table, empty, washed in gray. In the center, bold and unmistakable, a red and blue lunchbox. Carter's chest tightened. "That's good work," he said gently. "Why paint that?" Her fingers trembled. "I don't know. Just came to me." But Carter could hear the crack in her voice. "You were close to Jeremy Miles," he said carefully. Her brush slipped from her hand, clattering on the floor. She bent quickly, hiding her face. "I guess." Silence stretched until she whispered, "People don't know him. He understood me. He didn't laugh when I fainted during the fire drill. He said people like us had to stick together." "And Ethan?" Carter asked. "He's not Jeremy, but he listens. Sometimes." He said Mr. Dalton ruined everything. That Jeremy's life got wrecked because of him. Carter's stomach turned. Anger. Blame. A boy carrying his brother's resentment. A girl carrying loneliness. Poison in the middle. "Kayla," Carter said softly, "did Ethan ever talk about the lab spill last year? About chemicals missing?" Her breath caught. She shook her head too fast. Shadow gave a low grunt, catching the tremor of guilt. Carter didn't push, yet. Instead, he looked at the canvas again. "Sometimes the things we paint come from places we don't want to admit we've seen." Her eyes flicked up, startled. "Did Ethan tell you to paint this?" Carter asked. "No," she said quickly. "He doesn't care about my paintings." "Then why this lunchbox? Why today?" Her composure cracked. The brush clattered from her hand. Tears welled fast. "I didn't know it would," she stammered. Carter leaned forward, voice steady. "Did Ethan give you that box?" She shook her head violently. "He told me to put it there. Said it was just a prank, that it would make Mr. Dalton sick for a day. He swore no one would get hurt." Her words spilled fast, shaking. "I didn't want to. But he said I owed Jeremy, that I couldn't just stand by and let his family keep getting humiliated." Carter felt the weight settle like stone. Kayla wasn't the mastermind. She was a pawn. "You carried it into the cafeteria?" he asked. Her hands gripped the canvas, knuckles white. "I thought it was something gross, like rotten food. Ethan said no one would notice, that Dalton deserved it." Shadow gave a low sound, sensing truth tangled in fear. Carter steadied the dog with a touch. "Kayla, listen to me." His voice cut through her tears. "You didn't make that poison, but you placed it where a child almost died. Do you understand how close it came?" She shook her head, whispering, "I didn't know." Carter exhaled slowly. He had seen civilians tricked into carrying burdens they didn't understand. Innocence never erases damage. Shadow nudged Carter's leg, grounding him. He softened his tone. "Tell me everything. How Ethan convinced you. When?" Kayla wiped her sleeve across her cheek, smearing paint and tears. "He found me after school last week. Said Dalton ruined Jeremy's life. Said nobody cared about Jeremy, or me. That if I helped, people would finally notice." The words cut deeper than any accusation. A lonely girl convinced her silence made her invisible, dragged into a plan she never understood. "Thank you," Carter said quietly. Her voice wavered. "Am I going to jail? Not today. What matters is the truth, and you've given me that." Shadow stepped forward, nudging his nose gently against her knee. Kayla startled, then rested paint-smeared fingers in his fur. Shadow stayed still, his quiet absolution breaking the dam. For the first time, she sobbed openly, tears falling onto the painted lunchbox until the colors blurred. Carter stood slowly, chest heavy. Kayla Owens wasn't the villain. She was a child, pulled into darkness by loyalty and loneliness. As he looked down at her painting, now blurred with tears, he knew the truth had only begun to unravel. The art room had grown so still that even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed hushed. Afternoon shadows stretched across jars of brushes and half-finished canvases, reaching toward the girl hunched in her chair. Kayla Owens sat with her head bowed, sleeves smeared with paint, shoulders trembling with sobs that had been swallowed too long. Shadow lay near her shoes, amber eyes steady, his quiet presence filling the space with more comfort than words could. Carter stood a step back, arms crossed, watching the child unravel. He had seen hardened men break under regret, but nothing struck harder than a girl weeping because she had been pulled into darkness she didn't understand. "I thought it was just a prank," Kayla whispered. Carter lowered himself into the chair opposite, moving slowly, unthreatening. "Tell me." Her fingers twisted her sweatshirt until the fabric strained. "Ethan said it would just make Dalton sick, not poison. He promised no one would die." Carter's chest tightened. Thallium nitrate had no halfway. Whoever told her that had turned her into a tool. "You didn't know," he said. "But I carried it," she sobbed. "I put it there." "I saw Noah sit down, and I didn't stop him. Ethan said it wasn't my problem, and I believed him, because for once, someone needed me. Nobody ever needs me. I'm just..." "Quiet, Kayla. The girl everyone forgets. But Ethan said I mattered." Shadow stirred, nudging gently against her shin. Kayla startled, then touched his fur with trembling fingers. "He doesn't look at me like I'm a freak," she whispered. Carter let the silence breathe until her crying eased. Then he leaned forward. "Kayla, this wasn't your fault. You were lied to. You were used." Her head shook violently. "But if Shadow hadn't barked, Noah would have died. Because of me." "No," Carter said firmly. "Because someone used you as cover. You didn't make that poison. You were a pawn. Pawns get moved by someone else's hand." Her eyes lifted, desperate. "Then what does that make me?" "A kid who got caught in something too big," Carter answered. "Not a monster. Monsters know what they're doing." "You didn't." Kayla's sobs broke loose again, raw and unrestrained. Shadow pressed close, letting her bury her face against his neck until the storm passed. Carter waited. Healing always began with breaking. When her breathing steadied, He spoke gently. "I need you to trust me." Every word Ethan said. "Tell me." Through hiccups, she whispered, "He said Dalton ruined Jeremy's life. That Dalton walked around like nothing happened while his brother was hated. He said Dalton had to pay, but not forever, just enough to scare him. He said I was the only one he could trust. That I was invisible." Invisible. The very thing she hated had been twisted into the reason she was chosen. "You're not invisible," Carter told her quietly. "Not anymore. You're the reason we know the truth. That matters." Her eyes glistened, swollen from crying, but there was a flicker of relief. Someone finally saw her. Carter rose. Shadow gave one last nudge to her hand before falling in step beside him. "Stay honest, Kayla. No more secrets for someone else's anger." She nodded faintly, hugging herself. As Carter left, he glanced back. She sat slumped over her painting, tears staining the canvas where the red and blue lunchbox blurred beneath water streaks. Fragile, but no longer invisible. And Carter knew Ethan Miles was more dangerous than ever. The precinct was quiet that night. The sterile hum of fluorescence pressing down over battered desks and stacks of reports. Outside, Maple Hollow lay calm beneath street lamps, its peace disguising the storm it had just survived. Carter sat at a scarred desk, his badge beside a half-empty coffee cup, laptop glowing pale against his tired face. At his feet, Shadow slept lightly, paws twitching in dreams, head angled toward his partner even in rest. Reports were never just paperwork. They were the last place truth lived before it became numbers and files. Tonight's truth was heavy. He typed slowly. Report 1. Criminal recommendation. Subject: Ethan Miles, 12. Involvement in attempted poisoning at Maple Hollow Elementary. Evidence suggests premeditation and conspiracy. Manipulated peer Kayla Owens to carry out placement. Motive: retaliation against substitute teacher Dalton, believed responsible for brother's expulsion. Carter paused. The words twisted his stomach. A 12-year-old's name beside words like conspiracy and poison. He had written reports on cartel leaders with less venom, but the truth demanded it. He added, the subject did not appear to grasp the lethality of thallium nitrate. Despite this, his calculated use of a peer demonstrates manipulation requiring intervention. He saved the file, then opened a second. Report 2. School Board Recommendation. Incident reveals systemic gaps in mental health support. Staffing insufficient to address needs of vulnerable students, e.g., Noah Carter, Kayla Owens, Ethan Miles. Recommendation: full-time counselor, expanded outreach, early warning systems for behavioral red flags. His fingers moved faster now, fatigue sharpened by conviction. Without investment in mental health, the next crisis may not be averted, even with intervention. He saved it, leaning back. Justice on paper was cold, bureaucratic. It didn't capture Kayla whispering she thought it was a prank, or Noah clutching Shadow whispering, I thought it was mine. Only memory held that. At his feet, Shadow stirred. Carter reached down, brushing his hand across the dog's fur. You did your part. Now it's on me. Later, with the precinct nearly empty, Carter sat alone under the halo of a desk lamp. Shadow lay curled in his bed, the vest with K9 unit folded nearby, making him look, for once, like just a dog. Almost. You were right again, partner, Carter murmured. His voice surprised him with its softness. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes glowing amber in the lamplight. He gave a low huff, then settled again. Carter smiled faintly, tired. "Don't look at me like that. You know what I mean. I almost let suspicion blind me. Almost let a boy's last name make me forget the truth. But you didn't doubt. You never do." He thought of the cafeteria, Shadow lunging, barking, tearing the lunchbox from the table. That bark had sliced through chaos like a blade. It had been more than instinct. It had been true. "You saw it before anyone else," Carter whispered. "You always do." His mind drifted to other battlefields, Afghanistan, Iraq. Boys no older than Ethan, carrying explosives because someone older told them it would make them strong. Dogs saving lives then too, barking warnings that separated life from death. Now it was Shadow. Different war, same stakes, children's lives. "I write reports," Carter said softly. "But you don't need words. You trust what you sense, even when I don't." The room settled quiet again. Carter thought of Kayla's streaked face, Ethan's cracked defiance, Noah's trembling voice. Children, each carrying too much, and he, Marine officer, protector, was left to keep them from drowning in silence. "Suspicion saves lives," he muttered. "But maybe it destroys them too." Shadow stretched, paws reaching out even in sleep, as if reaching for something unseen. Carter smiled faintly. "That's why I need you, boy, because you don't just bark at danger. You bark for the ones who can't. You remind me what we're fighting for." He reached down, brushing his hand across Shadow's fur. The shepherd pressed closer, eyes steady. No judgment, just presence. "You were right again, partner," Carter whispered once more. His voice was worn but softer now, edged with something like hope. And for the first time that day, Carter let himself believe there would be enough hope to face tomorrow. The October morning dawned pale and cold, fog clinging low over Maple Hollow Elementary. Parents lingered longer in the drop-off line, their eyes following children through the doors. Rumors hadn't faded. A poisoned lunchbox, a dog's bark, a miracle. For the children, it was already a legend. For the adults, it was still an ache. At the far edge of the lot, Liam Carter clutched his backpack straps like lifelines. His mother, Rachel, bent to whisper, "It's just school, the same as before." But it wasn't, and both knew it. Inside, Officer Carter stood by the front desk, Shadow at his side, calm and steady. To the children, Shadow was now a hero. To Carter, he was still simply a partner. When Liam stepped into the lobby, his eyes locked on the cafeteria doors sealed with caution tape. His breath hitched. Shadow moved first, trotting forward, tail sweeping in a reassuring rhythm. Liam froze, then whispered, "Shadow." The shepherd sat squarely before him, gaze steady. Slowly, Liam's hand reached out. His fingers sank into fur. His shoulders eased. His breath steadied. Then he crouched and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. "I didn't want to come back," he admitted into Shadow's coat. "You don't have to be brave all at once," Carter said quietly. "Just one step at a time." Liam looked up, eyes red. "Is it gone? The box?" "It's gone," Carter said firmly. The boy clung tighter, until finally he stood again, his hand never leaving Shadow's collar, as they walked toward his classroom. At the cafeteria doors, his steps faltered, but the shepherd brushed against his leg, and he kept going. At the classroom, Carter asked softly, "You good?" Liam looked down. Shadow wagged once, sure and calm. Liam nodded. I'm good. That morning, Mrs. Albright began class with presentations. Liam's turn was next. He stood slowly, note card trembling, Shadow padding at his side. My presentation is about canine dogs. His voice cracked but steadied. They aren't just police dogs. They're partners. They sniff out danger, find people, save lives. Shadow isn't just a dog. He's the reason I'm still here. The room stilled. The children had whispered rumors, but now they heard it from Liam himself. That day in the cafeteria, he said, I thought the lunchbox was mine. If Shadow hadn't barked, I would have eaten it. I wouldn't be standing here. Gasps, whispers. Liam's eyes filled, but he pressed on. People think he's just a dog, but he's family. He saw me when nobody else did. He stopped, bracing for laughter. Instead, a single clap began, then another. Soon the class was applauding, the sound filling the room like sunlight breaking clouds. Liam flushed, but this time with warmth. Shadow wagged his tail in time with the claps. Thank you, Liam, Mrs. Albright said, her voice catching. That was very brave. When he sat again, a classmate leaned over. Your dog's awesome. For the first time since the incident, Liam smiled. In the staff room at lunch, the mood was subdued. Teachers clustered in small groups, eyes red, voices low. He's 8 years old, whispered Ms. Alvarez, the counselor, and he carried a truth most adults couldn't say out loud. Mrs. Albright dabbed her eyes. In 20 years of teaching, I've never been prouder or sadder. Principal Harrington sat heavily, tie loosened. That dog saved more than his life. He gave him a voice. Carter leaned in the doorway. Shadow stretched at his feet. His voice cut through quietly. Shadow did his job, but it shouldn't have come to that. The room hushed. I've seen men lose themselves to silence, Carter continued. You start believing no one notices you. No one cares if you're gone. That's when bad things happen. When kids like Ethan get pulled into anger. When kids like Kayla get used. When kids like Liam believe they're invisible. You don't need a war zone for that. It happens here. His words landed heavy. Ms. Alvarez spoke next. Steady now. We need to do more. These kids carry things we don't see. We have to look closer. Harrington straightened, jaw set. This school won't let another child feel invisible. The others murmured agreement, grief giving way to resolve. Carter said nothing further, letting their voices fill the room. Shadow rose and pressed his head against Carter's leg, steady and sure. Carter rested his hand on the shepherd's fur. Healing started, he murmured, but scars are forever. The staff room fell silent again, each person lost in thought. Shadow's tail swept once, twice, as though reminding them, scars don't mean weakness. Scars mean survival. Winter pressed down on Maple Hollow, the sky pale and unforgiving. The playground lay silent, swings creaking in the wind. Inside the school, warmth lingered, not just from the heaters, but from something more fragile. Change. The fallout from the Lunchbox incident hadn't disappeared. It had settled into the town's bones, reshaping how everyone looked at the children walking those hallways. Silence was no longer assumed to mean safety. The truth had broken that illusion, and the truth had names: Ethan Miles and Kayla Owens. 2 weeks after the investigation ended, Ethan was taken into custody. Juvenile detention. 12 years old, already behind locked doors. The day the deputy drove him away, he didn't look back. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared, but his eyes flickered with something hollow. Not pride, not rebellion, but loss. Loss of freedom, innocence, and perhaps the belief that he could be more than his brother's shadow. Teachers spoke of him in hushed tones, some with anger, others with pity. He knew what he was doing, one said. He's just a child, another countered. But whatever the debate, the line Ethan crossed could not be erased. Kayla's path was different. The court saw her as a pawn, not a mastermind. Her tears in the art room had carried more weight than Carter's reports. Instead of detention, she was placed in therapy and a youth support program. Twice a week, a van carried her across town to a clinic where counselors worked to untangle the knots Ethan had tied into her fragile sense of self-worth. At first, she walked with her head down, her backpack heavy, the stares of classmates cutting deep. But over time, whispers faded. Kayla wasn't invisible anymore, but she wasn't mocked either. She was fragile, but also a reminder of how easily a child could be pulled into darkness. The tragedy reshaped the school. Meetings once focused only on grades now opened with discussions of behavior and warning signs. Teachers leaned down more often, asked real questions. How are you sleeping? Are you eating? The cafeteria staff watched faces as much as food. Even the janitor admitted, "Kids used to be shadows to me. Now I stop and listen when one lingers too long. Shadows can hide things." Troubled kids weren't just problems anymore. They were warnings, calls for help, and the adults, finally, were beginning to listen. Carter carried the weight of Ethan's absence most. He thought of the boy often, the crack in his voice when he muttered, "It wasn't for that kid." Anger mixed with pity. Ethan had to face consequences, but Carter wondered if things might have been different had someone reached him sooner. Kayla, though, gave Carter hope. One afternoon, he passed the art room and saw her painting. Not a lunchbox this time, but wildflowers in sunlight. It wasn't perfect. The strokes still hesitant, but it was alive. She looked up, embarrassed, but Carter only nodded. Shadow wagged his tail once, as if approving. At his desk that evening, Carter flipped between Ethan's thick file of sealed orders and Kayla's thinner one filled with counselor notes of resilience and progress. 2 children, 2 paths, forever marked by the same red and blue lunchbox. He brushed his hand through Shadow's fur. The dog looked up as if reminding him lives had been saved, yes, but more importantly, lives were being reshaped. "Scars don't heal clean," Carter murmured, "but maybe they can heal stronger." The gymnasium smelled of polish and crayons, but today rows of chairs faced a podium beneath a banner. "Thank you, Shadow." Students filed in quietly. Even the youngest sensed the weight of the moment. At the center sat Shadow, calm as ever, tail tucked neatly around his paws. Principal Harrington's voice carried across the gym. 2 weeks ago, this school faced a danger most of us couldn't have imagined. And it was not a teacher or officer who saw it first. It was a dog. Shadow saved a life. He saved all of us. Carter stepped forward in uniform, fatigue hidden beneath the fabric. The principal handed him a small black box. Inside lay a tag engraved, "Shadow, Guardian, Hero." Carter clipped it onto his partner's collar. "There you go, boy. You earned it." Applause erupted, but Shadow simply looked up at Carter, waiting for the next command. From the bleachers, a child's voice rang out. "Lunchbox Shadow!" The chant spread until dozens of voices filled the gym. What began as a nickname born of fear had become something else. A promise. A reminder that even in tragedy, children could turn scars into stories. Noah slipped forward, wrapping his arms around Shadow's neck. The room fell silent at the quiet embrace. Carter felt his throat tighten. He had seen medals pinned to soldiers, folded flags given to widows. But this boy clinging to the dog who had saved him, was greater than all of it. Principal Harrington cleared his throat. Heroism doesn't always come in uniforms or speeches. Sometimes it comes on 4 legs with a bark that refuses to be ignored. When the ceremony ended, children stopped to pat Shadow's head, whispering thanks, pressing crayon drawings into Carter's hand, dogs with capes, lunchboxes, smiling stick figures. He tucked them carefully into his pocket. "You did good today, boy," Carter whispered. "Better than all of us." Shadow licked his hand once, his new tag glinting softly in the fading light. Heroes, Carter thought, didn't always walk on 2 legs. Sometimes they answered to the name Lunchbox Shadow. The house was quiet when Carter stepped inside. Shadow padded behind him, his new tag jingling. Carter collapsed onto the couch, fatigue pressing into his shoulders. Shadow curled at his feet, steady as always. "We'll always have evil in the world," Carter said into the silence. "But today, we stopped it." Shadow rested his head on Carter's knee, eyes calm, reminding him that burdens could be shared. Memories rose. Afghanistan patrols, the weight of suspicion, the sting of sand. But Shadow's instincts went deeper than suspicion. His bark had been truth itself. "You didn't just save Noah," Carter whispered, his voice fragile. "You saved me too. If I'd lost him—" He stopped, throat tight. Shadow pressed harder into his knee, grounding him without words. Leaning back, Carter let out a dry laugh. "A Marine's supposed to be stone, but these kids, this job, it cracks you in places you don't expect." Shadow stayed steady, the same presence he'd been in every hallway, every quiet moment. Carter stroked his fur. "We can't stop all evil, but as long as you're with me, we'll meet it head on, one bark at a time." The words weren't a speech, just a confession whispered into fur. Shadow didn't answer. He didn't need to. His breathing slowed, steady and loyal. And for the first time in weeks, Carter felt his shoulders ease. Not because the world was safe, but because he wasn't carrying it alone. The lamp's glow softened as night pressed against the windows. Carter's hand rested on the heartbeat beneath Shadow's fur. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, man and dog sat together, partners, guardians, and survivors. And in that presence, Carter finally let himself rest. The air inside Maple Hollow Elementary buzzed with the restless excitement of children trying to sit still, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of reverence. 2 years had passed since the day a German shepherd's bark had silenced a cafeteria, and though time had moved on, new teachers, new students, fresh coats of paint, some things remained etched into the soul of the school. Today, the library smelled faintly of sawdust and polish, its shelves freshly stocked with books, beanbags scattered in colorful circles. In the far corner, hidden behind a thick cloth, stood the reason the entire student body, staff, and several townsfolk had gathered. Principal Miriam Lowell adjusted her glasses and stepped up to the podium. She was new to Maple Hollow, hired just the year before, but she understood the story she had inherited. In her first week, she'd heard it whispered in classrooms, seen it scrawled in children's crayon drawings taped to walls. The lunchbox, the bark, the dog who saved a boy. Her voice, calm but warm, carried over the assembly. There are stories that fade with time, and there are stories that shape who we are. At Maple Hollow Elementary, one story has become part of our foundation. At her words, children shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others glancing instinctively toward the cloth-draped figure. In the front row sat Noah Carter, now 12, taller, his voice deeper, but still carrying the quiet gravity of the boy who had once believed the poisoned lunchbox was his. He wore a crisp junior cadet uniform, the same navy color his classmates had grown used to seeing when he volunteered with the K-9 demonstrations. Shadow wasn't by his side anymore. That loss still lived heavy in his chest. But today wasn't about mourning. Today was about remembering and honoring. Principal Lowell continued. 2 years ago, one of our own nearly didn't make it home. But because of a partner who saw what none of us could, tragedy became survival. That partner's name was Shadow. A hush fell over the room. Even the younger children, who had only ever known the story secondhand, stilled at the name. Lowell's voice softened. Shadow is no longer with us, but his courage, his loyalty, his bark, that will echo in this school for generations. And today, we dedicate a space in his honor. She nodded toward 2 fifth-graders standing by the corner. Together, with nervous smiles, they pulled back the cloth. Gasps rippled through the room. The bronze statue gleamed in the library's soft light. It was Shadow, captured mid-stance, ears pricked, eyes forward, body poised in quiet strength. The sculptor had managed to capture not just the shape of the dog, but the essence, a guardian, steady and watchful. Children leaned closer, awed, some reaching out as if to touch the cold bronze. Beneath the statue, a plaque had been set into polished oak. The inscription read, "To Shadow, Guardian, Hero. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks on 4 legs." The words seemed to hum in the silence that followed. Teachers wiped their eyes discreetly. Parents held their children's hands a little tighter. And in the second row, Carter sat in uniform, his back straight, his jaw tight. He hadn't spoken during the planning of the memorial, but when the principal had asked if he wanted to contribute a quote, he had written those words late one night at his kitchen table. They came from memory. His voice to Shadow in the quiet after the reports, the words he had whispered in the darkness when no one else could hear. Now they lived here, etched into metal, for every child who would ever wander into this corner of the library. Noah rose when the principal motioned him forward. His steps were steady, though his palms were damp. Standing beside the statue, he looked out at the sea of faces, classmates, teachers, townsfolk. And for a moment, the boy who once clung to a backpack felt small again. But then he saw the glint of the plaque, the bronze eyes of the shepherd staring into forever. And he found his voice. "Shadow saved me," he said simply. His voice cracked on the word, me. But he didn't stop. He didn't care that I was just the quiet kid in the corner. He didn't wait for someone else to act. He saw me when nobody else did. The library grew utterly silent. Every breath seemed to hang on his words. Noah swallowed, his throat tight, but pushed forward. I wouldn't be here without him, and I think that's what makes him more than a hero. He didn't just stop something bad. He gave me a chance to live, to grow, to stand here today. A tear slipped down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. Instead, he let it fall, let it carry the truth of what he was saying. Shadow isn't here anymore, but every time I walk into this school, I know he still is, in me, in all of us. The applause that followed wasn't loud, not the wild cheering of children on a normal day. It was softer, more reverent, a wave of gratitude that filled the space with warmth. Teachers dabbed at their eyes openly now. Parents sniffled and children clapped with wide-eyed sincerity. Carter exhaled, his chest heavy but proud. He looked at the statue, the plaque, the boy standing tall beside it. For a Marine who had once thought his best years were behind him, this moment felt like something greater than any battlefield honor. It was a victory measured not in territory won, but in lives saved, futures reclaimed. As the ceremony closed, children were invited to walk past the statue. Some touched the bronze paw, others whispered quiet words. The corner of the library that had once been just another reading nook now held something sacred. Carter lingered until the end, his hand brushing the cold metal of the shepherd's head. The inscription caught his eye again. Justice isn't always loud. He thought of Shadow's bark, the single sound that had cut through a cafeteria full of noise, loud enough to change everything, but born of silence, loyalty, and love. He whispered, barely audible, "You're still on watch, partner." And for a moment, in the quiet hum of the library, it felt like Shadow was... The gymnasium looked different when Noah stepped inside, not because the walls had changed, but because he had. At 12 years old, he was taller now, his shoulders beginning to square, his voice carrying a hint of the depth that comes with adolescence. His once shy gaze was steadier, though it still carried the quiet watchfulness of a boy who had lived in shadows for too long. Today he wore his junior K-9 cadet uniform, navy shirt tucked neatly into pressed khakis, a small badge glinting on his chest. The fabric felt stiff against his skin, but it wasn't uncomfortable. To him, it felt like armor, like belonging. The bleachers were filled with younger students, wide-eyed and fidgeting, their chatter filling the air like birdsong. Some whispered about the uniform. Others pointed at the bronze statue of Shadow in the corner, its eyes cast eternally forward. For most of them, the story of the poisoned lunchbox had become a legend, something older kids talked about in hushed voices. For Noah, it was not a legend. It was a memory. Principal Lowell introduced him with a few kind words, but Noah barely heard them. His heart thudded in his chest, his palms damp against the note cards he held. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his room, standing in front of the mirror, Shadow's bronze image always there in his mind. Still, standing here before so many eyes made him feel again like the boy who once clutched his backpack like a shield. Then he saw the younger students leaning forward, waiting. He saw their small faces, some curious, some restless, some quietly hungry for reassurance that the world could be safe. And in that moment, he remembered Shadow's gaze on the day of the lunchbox. Steady, calm, fierce in its simplicity. Noah took a breath and began. "My name is Noah Carter," he said, his voice cracking on the first word. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the younger kids, but he didn't flinch. He swallowed, lifted his chin, and tried again, louder this time. "My name is Noah Carter, and I want to tell you about a dog named Shadow." The room quieted. He wasn't just any dog. He was a K-9 officer. He was my protector, my best friend, and he saved my life. He paused, letting the words sink in. His eyes scanned the room, catching glimpses of wide stares and parted lips. 2 years ago, I thought a lunchbox on my table was mine. It wasn't. If I had opened it, if I had eaten what was inside, I wouldn't be standing here today. Shadow stopped me. He barked when no one else knew something was wrong. He didn't let me touch it. Noah's hands trembled, the note cards shaking. He lowered them, realizing he didn't need them after all. His truth was carved into him. Shadow didn't just save me. He made me visible. His voice cracked again. but this time with emotion, not nerves. Before that day, I was just the quiet kid. The one people forgot about, the one who sat alone at lunch. Nobody really saw me, but Shadow did. He looked at me like I mattered, and when he barked, the whole world had to look too. Teachers shifted in their seats, blinking back tears. Carter, standing near the back of the gym, felt his chest tighten. He had heard countless speeches in his life, commanding officers, politicians, eulogies, but none struck him like this boy's trembling words. Noah pressed on. Shadow is gone now. He's not here to walk the halls or sit by the door of the cafeteria. But he's here. He gestured to the statue, the bronze figure catching the light. Every time I walk past him, I remember that I'm not invisible. I remember that someone chose to see me, and I think that's what we can all learn from him. That sometimes being a hero isn't about stopping bad guys. It's about noticing the person who feels unseen. The silence was thick, fragile. Even the youngest kindergartners, who barely understood the story, sat still, sensing the gravity in his words. Noah's throat tightened, but he didn't look away. I want to be like Shadow. I joined the junior cadets because I want to help people the way he helped me. Maybe one day I'll train a dog of my own. But even if I don't, I'll always carry what he taught me, that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it walks on 4 legs, sometimes it just takes one bark. His final words lingered in the air. For a moment, no one moved. Then applause began, soft at first, then swelling until the entire gym was filled with the sound of clapping hands and stomping feet. Noah flushed, his chest rising with a strange mixture of pride and humility. He glanced toward the back of the room, where Carter stood, arms crossed, eyes glistening, though he'd never admit it. Carter gave him a firm nod, the kind of nod Marines give each other on battlefields, not over words, but over courage. The boy nodded back, his heart steady. As the applause rolled on, Noah stepped down from the stage. Some of the younger students reached out to pat his arm as he passed. One whispered, "I want a dog like Shadow." Another, even smaller, said, "You're brave." Noah smiled, an honest, unguarded smile, and for the first time, he believed it. At the back, he paused by the statue. The bronze eyes seemed to meet his own, and in that silent exchange, he felt it again. The presence of the dog, who had saved him not only from poison, but from invisibility. Quietly, almost to himself, he whispered, "Thank you." And as he walked out of the gym, his cadet badge catching the light, it felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. The porch creaked beneath the weight of time and memory. Carter sat in his old rocking chair, its paint long faded, its wood polished smooth by years of quiet evenings. The air was crisp with autumn, sharp enough to sting the lungs, yet sweet with the scent of leaves scattered across the yard. Beyond the porch, the valley stretched wide, trees painted in strokes of gold and rust, their branches bowing in the breeze. He cradled a chipped mug of coffee, though it had long gone cold. The steam had vanished, but he held onto it anyway, the weight familiar, grounding. Some habits didn't break with retirement. They only softened, slowed. At his feet lay River, a young black lab with a sheen to her coat and mischief still in her bones. She wasn't Shadow, not by a long stretch. Her ears were softer, her gaze more playful, her body restless with youth. Yet when she sprawled across the porch planks, her head resting just inches from his boots, Carter felt something that steadied him, the rhythm of her breathing. A heartbeat that echoed another he still carried with him. The wind picked up, rattling the dry leaves across the steps. River's head lifted, ears twitching at the sound. She gave a soft whine, then settled again, her tail sweeping lazily against the wood. Carter reached down, his hand brushing her fur, the gesture both affectionate and reverent. "Different dog," he whispered into the air, his voice low, rough with age and memory. "Same heartbeat. The words floated into the evening like a prayer, caught by the wind and carried across the valley. He leaned back, rocking slowly, eyes drifting toward the horizon where the last streaks of orange bled into dusk. His mind wandered, as it always did, to Shadow. He could still hear the bark that tore through the chaos of a cafeteria and rewrote the fate of a boy. He could still see the steady amber eyes that had anchored him through nights darker than war. Shadow had been more than a partner. He had been a compass. A reminder of what mattered when Carter's own sense of direction faltered. And though the shepherd had passed quietly, curled beside the bed, as the sun rose 2 summers ago, his presence lingered still, stitched into every quiet moment like this one. River shifted, pressing closer against his boots, her warmth seeping through the leather. Carter smiled faintly, running a hand along her back. "You've got big paws to fill, girl," he murmured, "but you're doing just fine." He thought of Noah, no longer the frightened boy who once clung to a backpack like armor. 12 now, standing taller each time Carter saw him, his junior cadet uniform worn with pride. The boy had found his voice, found his footing, and in doing so, carried Shadow's legacy forward. River was his partner in training, but tonight she was here, stretched across Carter's porch as if she knew the old Marine still needed company. Carter's chest tightened with quiet gratitude. Life had a way of weaving circles, pain into healing, endings into beginnings. One dog gone, another stepping into her place. One boy nearly lost, now becoming a young man, strong enough to protect others. The rocking chair creaked as he shifted, setting his mug aside. The sky deepened into indigo, stars flickering into being one by one. The quiet pressed in, but it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It was the kind that held you, that reminded you that the world, for all its cruelty, could still give back. His gaze drifted again to the river. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, her paws twitching as though she dreamed of running fields he couldn't see. In the soft lamplight spilling from the house, she looked both ordinary and extraordinary, a dog asleep at her master's feet, and yet the living proof that loyalty never really dies. It simply passes on. Carter let the words come again, this time softer, almost a sigh. Different dog. Same heartbeat. River's ears twitched at the sound, though she didn't wake. Carter leaned back further, closing his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw Shadow one more time, not the bronze statue, not the memory of that bark, but the way he had been on quiet nights like this, curled at Carter's side, his steady presence enough to ease the weight of a Marine's ghosts. He let himself believe, just for a moment, that Shadow's spirit lived here still, watching from the edges of the porch, his amber gaze steady against the shadows. And with River pressed close, with the stars brightening above, Carter felt something he hadn't let himself feel often enough. Peace. Sometimes the truest heroes don't wear uniforms or speak in words at all. They walk on 4 legs, carrying a loyalty that never wavers. Stories like Shadow's remind us that dogs, especially German shepherds, have a way of seeing us when we feel invisible, of standing guard when no one else is watching. Their love is simple, but it carries the weight of something eternal, a bond that heals, protects, and makes us whole. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that unspoken understanding, you already know what I mean. And if you'd like to explore ways to deepen that connection, little things that help you and your dog feel even closer, I'll leave a resource below. Take a look if it feels right. It's something I've found meaningful myself. At the end of the day, it's not about training tricks or shiny collars. It's about cherishing the quiet moments, the wag of a tail, the comfort of knowing you're never really alone. So give your dog an extra scratch tonight. They've already given you their whole heart. It's the least we can do in return.